And in Columbia, South Carolina, we had a flood. I was in Houston. I heard the drumbeat of the Weather Channel. Like many people, we discounted them as just selling anxiety medication. They really weren't telling the truth. They were just getting us all hyped. They said it was going to be terrible. So I did the courageous husband thing and left town and left Kathy there to deal with it all by herself. We talked through Friday. We talked through Saturday night. Said, yeah, see there, they were wrong. You can't count on those people. Said, I'm going to plug my phone in, cut it off. Here's the hotel number if you need me during the night. I need to have an early service to preach in the morning, and so I'm just going to cut off my cell phone so someone doesn't call from Eastern Europe or something in the middle of the night. Pulled into the church parking lot, and right outside the door there in my space, right before I go in to preach, and power up the phone. How's it going? She said, Reggie, it sounds like a waterfall in the basement. There's water coming in by the kitchen. She said, I've never seen anything like it. She said, I'm scared to open the door. I said, don't open that door. Is there water coming through that door? No. We learned later we took on 5 feet of water in our basement, wiped out all of our mechanical, electrical, HVAC, hot water. Water didn't get in the house, though, except through a couple of places in the roof. But she went up, she said, oh, there's water coming in, I got to go. And hung up. So I knew the basement was flooding. Water was coming in the kitchen on the first floor. And she had made it to the second floor to tell me that water was coming in up there. I got to go. Boom. Now I have to go preach. And I have no idea what's going on at my house. All I know is we're taking on water. And my wife's terrified. And I walk in, and the choir is rehearsing the song we just sang. And the very first words I heard were, like a flood. His mercy flows. And I thought, it's not really the metaphor I want to hear right this minute. But it occurred to me later, I was telling Tony and Dean about this. You can't stop a flood. You can't stop it. It just keeps coming and coming. The water keeps rising because it's been fed upstream or something, or a dam broke or whatever, and it is unstoppable. It runs its course. And by the way, we have managed to fix. We were fortunate. I mean, our losses were minimal. Time and money can replace our stuff. We have many neighbors and stuff that lost their whole homes, just totally washed away. Unbelievable. People swimming for their lives. 20 people lost their lives. People trapped in cars. One family we knew, the kids are on their back. They're swimming at 4 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the dark. They have no idea which way they're going. The current is swirling around. So we were fortunate. But it occurred to me later on as I was thinking about it in this flood business. It is exactly right. You cannot stop God's mercy. Like a flood. You can't hold it back. It will have, and the kingdom is exactly like that. It will have its way. And it will make its way. And like a flood, it'll find any way in it can. It's like a virus in another metaphor. The kingdom is a viral future path. It's really a future antidote to the stuff that ails us. It's a future that's trying to break in on the present any way it can. And so, our discussion last night to talk about it's time for us to change our story to match the kingdom story. To get off of the little story, that we've made the big story, flip the script from a church narrative to a kingdom narrative, from a focus that's too small to joining God in His great work is exactly the message I want to leave you with. And just to let you know, though, the flood's on your side. Godfrey called me from Hawaii. He's a Methodist pastor in his own sabbatical there, where all sabbaticals should happen. I recommend for ministerial health, pastoral health in your world here, that you should mandate sabbaticals in Hawaii as part of your trek toward health. This is easy. And he calls me and he says, I don't know him. He introduces himself. He says, I've been at my church for 20 years. Now, I don't know, Methodism, that's a long run to be in one place. You're either extraordinarily good or you have compromising photographs on the bishop. And in Godfrey's case, I'm pretty sure it was the photographs. And so he's telling me, he says, I have built this church, 5,000 members. And he said, and it's eaten my soul. He says, I don't think I can make it to retirement. I'm totally out of gas. He said, I'm tired of feeding the beast. He said, but I read something, that one of my earlier things that I'd written. He says, and you're saying some things that kind of make sense to me. I've been thinking them. I didn't just know how to say it. I said, I thought I was crazy. I said, you are crazy, but let's be crazy together, so come see me. So he came up to Dallas, brought his team. We spent some time together. I challenged them in some of the ways that I challenged you last night, and some of the ways I'm going to challenge you this morning, or hope to inspire your imagination a bit, about what can happen when we align with the kingdom. And he, remarkably, he went back in 3 months, he raised $1 million. He started, because I challenged his particular team in my part of the country. I said, if we have the courage to change the scorecard, remember that's number 2 of this 3-legged stool. If we're going to shift the culture and shift the script, somewhere back in here, I talked about the fact we've got to change our narrative, what we talk about, and then we're going to have the courage to change what we celebrate. By the way, if you don't like the word scorecard, and I understand that, particularly after last night's game, if you don't like it, don't use it. It's just what I use. What I'm talking about is, what is it that we celebrate? What is it that we make a big deal out of? Because I'm telling you, what we make a big deal out of, what we ask people for, that's what they think is important. So if we ask them for church attendance, they think, attending church is what makes me a good Jesus follower. If we ask them, don't drink, don't smoke, then they say, okay, so that's what makes me. What is it that we celebrate when we come together? That's the big deal. People systems, that's the way it works. Listen, on a plane not too long ago, I watched a young couple in training of their 3-year-old to be a terrorist. He already had our 150 of us hostage on a 3-hour transcontinental flight. And everybody on the plane wanted to take over parenting duties for just a while. It takes an economy class to raise a child. Because we knew that the way these parents were responding to this child, they were just imprinting. They were going to get more of this behavior. You reward bad behavior, you just get more. This is how it works. So I'm talking about building a culture where we reward and celebrate the stuff that we want to see more of. So I talked to their particular team about how would they make the biggest impact in their community. You see, it strikes me when I go around from denomination to denomination, and remember, you're not one, so I'm not talking about you. We'll talk about reviving the church. We'll talk about getting our numbers up. I rarely hear a discussion about how are we going to have a better Newfoundland. What if your determination was that your communities be stronger? What if your determination is that Labrador, be a better place for people to live? What if abundant life? What if Jesus was really serious and not just making up scripture? When he said, I've come to give you life. And what if we had the courage to hang our scorecard on that? And say, I messed around with Godfrey's team. And in our part of the world, I will tell you, this may be true for you, I don't know, I can't speak for this. But I just know that our educational system is in tatters. And a public system that has, run out its course. And if you think the church is having a difficult time in the new digital world, you should try being in education with a mass standardized approach, because we know every kid learns exactly the same way at exactly the same time. And we have this no teacher left standing culture that we've created with all these testings and all this kind of stuff, as if that's really, it's amazing. Just drop in here from Jupiter and understand that we have, Kayla's up here making her talk from her smartphone. And these devices that can suck the Library of Congress out of thin air, or whatever your corresponding, library is. I'm sure it's much bigger. And here we are going around collecting up people in vehicles and taking them to a central information dump. Does that make sense? Of course not. It's craziness. But you see, that institution hasn't caught up yet with the new reality. It's going to take 100 years to figure this out, probably, as we settle in. Just like the church hasn't caught up to the new reality of how people are expressing their spiritual life. That 20-year-old I was talking with this morning, who at the hotel where I was staying, beautiful young lady, tender-hearted, believes in God, wants nothing to do with the church. So I told her she was going to hell, and I had to come speak to y'all. She got it. The positive, by the way, kudos to some Pentecostal pastor, actually a teacher in a college, who she's had as a student, who has taken an interest in her and has been kind enough just to talk to her about God and not push the church business. Because that's what's going to warm this kid. We can force her to become like us in order to get the gospel, or we can treat her like a human being that needs the gospel, and then Jesus does his own work. Only the work that he can do. Now, I don't know where I left. I'm trying to get back to Godfrey. I've got like 4 storylines going here. So I told Godfrey's team, I said, if you want to make the most difference in your town, then outside the church, then get involved in public education, because everything that's going on in the community is manifesting in the school system, public school system. So they went back, they raised $1 million, they bought it, they got it, went back, raised $1 million. There's 110,000 students in their school system, one district in Texas, northwest Houston. 110,000 students. That's the population of what, Labrador? Or something like that? How many people we have? Maybe half the population. Doesn't matter. Y'all should know these things. I'm a little tired of having to tease information out of you. And so 95%, 42 Title I schools. Now, you may not have a Title I school in our world is a third world country. It's where 90 to 95% of the kids are on free or reduced lunch. What do you call it here? Do you have schools in that situation? In those kinds of... You have more kids on reduced and free lunch than you realize in most communities that think they're well off don't understand how hunger challenged, food challenged many of the families and the kids are in the public school system. That's the only food they get. And then it's just amazing. So anyway, we were talking about, and they went back, raised $1 million, started the Cy Hope Foundation for the Cy Fair school system Talk about a different scorecard. And their goal is to put an after-school program right next to every Title I school. Let me tell you, I visited the second one they had up. Total Hispanic mobile home park, 100% Hispanic population. Nothing in the mobile home park is mobile. Everything's cemented to the ground. They bought a trailer, one of the trailers in there. I went in, there were 30-something kids there. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They'd already had their snack. They had over a dozen people, adult volunteers, helping these kids with their homework. The art council comes down once a week or comes out once a week and does art classes. Musicians from the Houston Symphony come and teach music classes. That particular night, there was going to be the once every 3 to 4 weeks family night where the parents, not only was going to be food, but there was going to be ESL classes, finance classes, nutrition, parenting classes, all this kind of stuff to help all these families have a better life. These kids were having a safe place to play, a snack after school, someone to help them with their homework, art, music, all the stuff that our kids had because they were smart enough to choose us as parents. But a lot of these kids didn't make as smart a choice. But they are determined to bring that quality of life to these kids. And by the way, the whole thing was being run and managed that day by a 19-year-old young woman, bright as the sun. She's not waiting to get successful to be significant. She's changing the world every single day. And she could light up any room, anywhere. This is on their way to 42. Their scorecard is that every kid in their school system have an adequate after-school program to help them so that they can do better in school and do better in life. Because, can I tell you, education is the one factor that covers more waterfront than any other single factor. It impacts every life, health area, including spirituality. If kids don't learn to read, they're not going to read the Bible. They're not going to be able to read our bulletins. What are we thinking? And so, but it impacts health, it impacts job, it impacts family, it impacts longevity. So if you want to make that's just one point of being able to be people of blessing in a community. They've determined to do this. Now, by the way, I saw Godfrey 2 weeks ago. Remember, I didn't tell you, he was about 60 years old when we chatted, and he wasn't sure he could make it to retirement. We're 3 years in now. Saw him 2 weeks ago during the flood because I was with him. He said, "Reggie, I wish I had 30 more years." Explain the difference. You see, when I met him, church work was killing him. Doesn't it strike you as funny that when pastors get together and church leaders, we talk about how hard it is and how it's sucking the life out of us? Doesn't that strike you as odd and paradoxical that Jesus would die, split his heart wide open, and we would be involved in something that seems to be so devastating to our lives? The difference is Godfrey has stepped into the kingdom because the kingdom is life. And he's in the flood. There's life everywhere. He's having more fun than he's had in I don't know when. Now, by the way, he's still having church on Sunday. And the Sci-Hope Foundation, you can look it up. They now have 7 full-time counselors. 7. To help families. They have food. They distribute 1,300 backpacks every weekend. These kids that we feed all weekend go home to no food that we feed all week go home to no food over the weekend. 6 pounds of food per backpack. You do the math. Is it pounds up here? Or kilos or whatever it is? See, down where we just do drugs in kilos. Everything else is in pounds. So I'm not sure what the exact, translation rate is. We're talking about several tons of food a week. We're talking about it. It is amazing how their scorecard has changed when they decided to be people of blessing, partnering with God in being kingdom viral agents in Houston, in the world. Not just measuring, did we get through our church year okay and meet budget, but it's somehow the people around us, just in case God is not caught off guard by where we are. So what would your score? How would your scorecard look differently? I just give you Godfrey's example just to excite your imagination. And I can tell you right off the bat, there's no template for this. You see, that standardized template of if your church is doing well, you're growing, and boom, 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 it doesn't exist. It's a myth, and it is a debilitating myth. Because guess what? If we really believe our theology that, that we have, look at this. It's snowing like crazy. I've never seen this. I didn't know this stuff really happened down where I live. This is very rare, and it was supposed to be clear today. Planes probably don't even fly in this kind of stuff. I may be stuck here. How horrible to fall in amongst a bunch of Pentecostals. You have, because I won't think to say this again because I'll be out of time and running out the door, just in case we fly. You've been so gracious, and I'm so thankful. You see, I roam around all these tribes. I'm just trying to feather a nest so that when I'm finally kicked out of my own tribe, I'll have someplace to land. I think you would be a welcoming group. You've been profoundly wonderful. Thank you for your hospitality. But do something about this snow, because I do have other people to persecute starting tomorrow in Dallas. So there is no template, because because each congregation, first of all, since you're part of the church in your community, but not all the church. I know you're the purest part of the church in your community. I get that. And the others are kind of quasi-church. We've had to invent words with our institutionalization of church, which never was intended. We've had to invent words like parachurch. It's like being a little pregnant. As far as I know, you either are or aren't. You're either church or you're not. If church is a relationship, that's like being a little married. Oh, today I think I am. Are you kidding? Since church is a relational thing, a relational not it. You're not all the church in your community. Believe it or not, there's some people flying under other banners. And believe it or not, you're just part of the body of Christ. So I don't know what part of the body is, so that's going to impact your scorecard. If we treat every church like a knee or mouth or ears or eyes, you know what I'm saying. So there's no template. You got to figure out what is our contribution in our community as viral kingdom agents, working with the rest of the body of Christ to make a difference and to bring about the life that God intends people to live. Here and now, not just out there. So what I would do, and what I do with all my clients, and I'm just going to say this and then I actually say, let's take the same resources we've been using to do congregational life. And see, by the way, the congregational life form, I was chatting with your denominational crew that brought me here the other day. The congregational modality, which has been the predominant, if not single modality of church in the Western world for 1,700 years, is the tail that's wagging the whole dog. Everything's geared around serving the congregation. Our denominations are collections of congregations. When we talk about starting churches, we basically are talking about cloning another congregational thing out there. Usually it means we start a worship service and hope a church grows up around it. Can I tell you, the last 2 church starts that I've been most intimately involved with are not starting congregations. The congregation was not the first life form, by the way, in the Christian taxonomy. For 300 years before there was the congregational life form, it was what? Did y'all read back that far? Yeah, it was house church. So when we quote phrases like, don't forsake the assembling yourselves, we're not talking about Sunday school. If people say, well, you can't do church, we're supposed to come together. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Of course you're going to gather. But is there just one way of gathering? Of course not. And in parts of the world where the movement is exploding, where we are seeing Pentecost every hour, the congregation is not the primary modality of church expression. I'm watching new life forms emerge for this new world. And we're going to have to expand the bandwidth of what we think church looks like if we're ever going to make... I mean, you younglings, all clumped up over here, maybe spreading out a little bit as you've learned you don't like each other as well as you thought. I mean, these 20-somethings never grew up in a world where they had to go to a bank to bank. Let me tell you how tough it was when I was a kid. If I wanted music, I had to go to a record store to get it. And it was 3 miles uphill, both directions, through the snow. And y'all remember we had to buy 12 songs to get one we liked. You couldn't customize your music. Well, this is science fiction. This stuff that, just walking around listening to music. I mean, if we wanted to walk around listening to music, we finally thought we would arrive when we had a boombox the size of a Volkswagen. And then that was really cool. I mean, you have no... So these young... In fact, when I was your age, if I wanted... I can remember all the way back to when I was in high school, if we wanted pizza, we had to go get it. No one brought it to our home. If I wanted to watch a movie, where did I have to go? To a theater. Exactly right. And these kids are growing up in a world where none of that. So we're saying if you want God, show up on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock at our joint. That's when he makes an appearance. What? I mean, just on the face of it, how absurd is that? That 20-year-old kid that I had breakfast with this morning, as we were going through coffee and stuff, and she's telling me about her life. She's not wanting to wait till Sunday to figure out something. She needs God today. Right now. In that hotel breakfast room. I mean, is this crazy or what? But we've been doing it so long it feels normal. See? This is what I'm trying. So the congregational modality is what has pushed our scorecard. So we've taken all of our resources like prayer and time and money and people and facilities. And I was going to tell you about the last 2 church starts, didn't I? Y'all just keep interrupting. The last 2 church starts I've been a part of didn't start congregations. They're starting businesses. You say, well, no, that's not church. Who said? If I'm church everywhere I am, if I'm churching my way through this world, let me tell you what Joey and 5 of his friends decided. They'd go to Fort Worth. They would go into the most crime-infested, drug-infested part of town. They bought a building. They took 5 families and moved into the hood. And they started a restaurant. It's called Brewed, B-R-E-W-E-D. And yes, some parts of the menu you won't like. But it is a fabulous restaurant. It has initiated a renaissance that's 2 miles long as other businesses now have come in because they have reclaimed that space. And they have brought light back to darkness. They have unshuttered retail space that was great. They have created 70-something jobs. They have a formula that 60% of the folks they hire are Jesus followers because they want the flavor of Jesus, but they realize that the best shot in evangelism is working side by side with people 8 hours a day. When you put some salt and light right there, it just rubs off on people. See? They are very smart about what they're doing. So that's what you want to do. Maybe your scorecard as a province is how many businesses have we started? When I was with Pentecostals in England a year ago, have I talked to you about them? Glossolalia with a British accent? Sounds so much smarter. I'm just messing with you. I could understand yours better, yeah. Couple from Wales, late 60s. They stopped by my table to tell me their church planting experience. I want you to hear this, because these are Pentecostals, so you can trust this. They go into town in Wales. You remember the Welsh Revival? Got those big old honking chapels that seat hundreds of people with 3 people knocking around in them on Sunday. 100 years, less than 100 years later. Yeah. So they go into town, and guess what? They didn't go to start a worship service. They went to plant the church. Get that different. If you're planting the church, you plant it in soil that's indigenous. You put something to root that makes sense for where. So they went to the city fathers. They're Pentecostals, though. They can get away with this. They went to the city fathers, and they asked the question, what does this town need? That's the right question for kingdom-minded church planters. Not, we're going to start a church and hope y'all come support it. Holy cow. What a... In fact, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and there was this new Anglican deal. I'm coming back to Wales. Don't let me forget this. And this Anglican priest was showing me that they'd built this multi-gazillion dollar building to look old. And right off the bat, in the middle of this well-heeled part of town, I mean, what a throwback. It was fascinating. And they had printed up all these brochures that they were handing out and mailing out, announcing their first month of services. I can't help myself. I asked the priest, I said, why don't you announce yourself by doing a month of service? Instead of saying, come and get it. Bing, 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 we're here now. Serving up God. Bing, 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 bing. What are we saying to that community? Oh, we hope you all will support this new church that we've started. So this Welsh couple, have I mentioned they're in their late 60s? Yes. What does this town need? And the town fathers told them, well, we've had 3 malls located outside of town. They've sucked all the business out of the community. They're all going to the malls. Our inner city is dying. We're shuttering businesses. And they said, well, we can't help you with that. We're here to start a worship service. I said, we'll pray about it. See Pentecostals. We'll be back to you. So they went and they prayed. This is something that would never occur to a Baptist. We would already have our manual. We would just refer to chapter 4, what to do in case of, city shutdown. So they went back to the council, to the whatever your Welsh village is run by, and they made all these demands. See, Pentecostals, they can do this. They said, if you'll give us a building, if you'll give us an architect and pay for it to fit the building, if you'll give us all the code stuff, all these demands, we're your people, we'll help you. And the fathers of the said, you got it. See, only Pentecostals could pull this off. So a year later, they started a coffee shop, by the way, to plant the church. Put scripture verses on the wall. I don't know what they called the coffee shop. Doesn't matter. All I can tell you is there are 30-something people that have jobs. It has become a hub of inner city. 3 other businesses have moved back in because they've opened this space back up. People come into their store to order a latte and start crying. And they say, we don't know why we're crying. We're not sad. There's just something about, and these, Pentecostals say, well, we can help you with this. It's called God. And they're having all these conversations with people in the shadow of these old Welsh chapels. See, that's planting the church. By the way, they've been so successful, the school has asked them to please come plant the church in the school. I'm telling you, when the flood gets going, all these doors pop open, but it takes somebody to say yes to the Spirit. Somebody with imagination fired from on high. In fact, I know 2 pastors who've left pastoring congregations. I'm not recommending this for everybody. You're going to keep meeting and don't hear what I'm not saying. Go right on. Have Sunday service. I'm not saying shit. But I know 2 pastors who have left pastoring congregations to go pastor businesses. You say, well, that's not right. I'm telling you, gang, we retrofit back into the New Testament our way of thinking about church and congregation. And we read all this stuff about pastors, prophets, evangelists, and we have turned those into church jobs. They weren't given as church jobs. They were gifts. If you are gifted as a pastor, you know what? We can throw you down in the middle of Best Buy, and you're going to be pastoring people because that's who you are. It doesn't matter where the paycheck comes from to validate your call. That is an absurd human thing that we have done to it. The call is from God, and if He wants to route the money to support your gift of pastoring through a business, what difference does that make? Except maybe insurance and taxes. Again, those things that heaven is mightily concerned about. I don't know how they are keeping books up there. So if you took the same resources, and I could just give you an example, and you took this and said, how are we going to take these from just funding our congregation through prayer, funding it through money, and how are we going to be people of blessing to our community with prayer booths, prayer walking our neighborhoods? See, now you Pentecostals have a leg up on us. I'm telling you, it's time for you to claim your heritage. Because if you're prayer walking your neighborhood, I promise you, stuff's going to happen. Not stuff. We moved into our neighborhood 5 years ago. I can tell you, most sociologists that study this says it takes about 2 years, and that was our experience. They knew we had something to do with church, but they weren't sure. No one asked us. We lived down the corner of this 2-block stretch, 100-year-old neighborhood. Some people have lived there 2 generations, very old. And Kathy, did 2 things to begin to make us indigenous. First of all, she started a women's book club. There wasn't one. It's called Read Between the Wines. I can tell you, reading is optional with that crowd. I mean, boy, you talk about a bunch of women that can put it away. I'm just saying. And they get together, so they start a book club, and our 2 Yorkies, her 2 Yorkies. I'm just, I'm just some interloper. They live there. She walks and she prays. Kathy's a great prayer warrior. She prays. She prays for our neighbors. She prays as she walks by their homes. Prays for them. And I cannot tell you now how many conversations have opened up. 3 doors up from us, and I know we're recording this. These are real people I'm talking about. But 3 doors up from us, there's a couple. He's a physician. She's a nurse. They despise the church. There's not a single time that she and Kathy walk that she doesn't say, I need you to pray for me. It took 2 years just praying, believing God. Because you got to believe that God is at work in every human being that you run into. He's got there before you did. And He's more interested in them than you are. How much fun could this be? How much money have we given away to our community? How much have we invested in our community? How many jobs have we started? How much of community? Why not celebrate the number of volunteer hours your people spend in the community service right along with Sunday school attendance? Pastors say, well, how will you know that? I say, ask them. Just ask them. Now, people will lie like dogs. I understand that. The point is not how many. The point is by what we ask, we are saying to them, we think it is a normative expression of the Christian life that we would be loving our neighbors and serving our community. So we want to celebrate that. And then, every other week you tell a story from someone who's actually being a person of blessing right where they live. I was with Michael Frost in Australia a few months ago, and he told me an interesting story. Every Sunday in the gathering that he meets with, they ordain a layperson. He says, I'm not trying to do away with ordination. I'm trying to get everybody ordained. They call up a person, they rehearse their gifts, they talk about their strengths, and they lay hands on them, and they ordain them as missionaries and active ministers in the world where they're already deployed. How fun is that? And you think these folks take that seriously? You're dadgum right, because they just did a survey of the parts of the service that it's the number one thing. It beat the sermon. What if we took our facilities and turned them in community development centers? When I was in India, when we dedicate, oh gosh, I just got to, I get off the van. I'm in Salem, right outside of Salem, a small village of 1 million people. And Sam, Gospel for Asia, my host, I'm greeted by over 200 orphans who line the way into the compound. Not all orphans in the strictest sense, no mom and dad, but the parents had brought them to Sam because they said, you can give them a better life than we can. Imagine the trauma, the living of that. You talk about darkness. You want to know the hope that Jesus brings, just journey into a Hindu culture where there is no hope. Your only hope is you get to come back and try again. And you're in the spot you're in because you screwed up the last 100 lives. I mean, it is hopeless. Oh my gosh, dark, dark, dark. 200 kids, over 200 kids. The next day I toured the rest of the facility, the school with 900 kids in it. 900 children. The community college where they were trained, fully accredited, where they were training nurse practitioners, teachers, and computer software folks, fully accredited. Have I mentioned the agribusiness that they're doing to teach farmers better agricultural stuff? Have I mentioned their microeconomic lending, so that a family can own their first goat outright, which moves them into middle class, instead of the usurious interest that they can never pay off? Have I mentioned the coffee plantation on the mountain behind? Sam says, we don't grow coffee to grow coffee. We grow coffee because it's 70 jobs that we can create. Talk about apostolic. And Sam has been involved, his organization, just in case you're thinking, well, what's he doing for Jesus? They've only planted 40,000 congregations in the last 10 years. Now I know, let's just say Sam is a liar and divide by 2 or 10. But Sam's not a liar. I went to some of those congregations. Pastors, we dedicated one of the, they don't even call them churches. You see how smart this is? They call them life centers. Kingdom's about life. And when we dedicate, now in the West, when we dedicate a church building, we dedicate it to the glory of God and our use. And typically we have a manual that goes along with a new building that's thicker than the foundation on how to keep the community out of our building. Who gets to use it? And when they dedicate a building, 4 of the 5 prayers of dedication were about the village, about the world, about how they gather there as Jesus followers on Sunday as a witness and to be with each other. But the rest of the week, it's whatever the village needs the building to be. School, hospital, clinic, farm center, whatever. Why don't you just turn your church into a community development center? Counseling, whatever, food distribution, what does your community need? That would change everything. Changes the scorecard. And I don't want to talk about technology because I don't know anything about it. Plus, I just got to get on to the last piece. But you see what I'm saying? Just begin to dream of how God would use your people and celebrate. You don't have to quit celebrating I'm talking about expanding the bandwidth. This is not either or. This is about flavoring and stuff. Now, I've got 10 minutes to talk about this last thing. And the good news is I know less and less about each of these, so it matches the time perfectly. So what are you going to do about this? I suspect some of you were troubled by my presentation last night because you're wondering, does my life matter? Am I just doing something that isn't? Be done with that. Only the enemy's whispering that stuff to you. You are positioned, and I can tell you something. You are leading a group of people. You are a bundler of social capital in your community. If you can unbundle that, you could bless your community in ways. You are positioned by God to be a great leader in the kingdom movement. So get over being sorry and all that kind of stuff and what you're not doing or whatever. Just get over it and let's go to work. Because we got a new world to figure out. And we're going to screw up doing it. We need more failures. We know the failures that we're good at. We need some new ones. So your numbers are going down on Sunday. So what? Get over it. We ought to be talking about how many people we're touching through the week anyway. What kind of a silly number is that? You think God really is hung up on Sunday school attendance or church attendance? This is craziness that's been fostered by a system that has a scorecard that is shrink-wrapped to a church narrative. It is inadequate at best. It is idolatrous at worst. And you need to do something about it. See, I've already been paid now. So let me give you a few tips. I think I have 5 of them. First of all, go first. Don't sit around here and wait and complain about the denominational staff or headquarters or provincial leadership. They're wonderful people as far as I know. They've been nice to me, and they seem to be open. Why would I be here? They weren't completely ignorant about what I was going to talk about, and if they were, they've done a good job of acting cordial. They may have a mess to clean up after I leave, but so far they've been pretty nice about it. I am worried about Clarence. Oh, good to see you, Clarence. Yeah. He could tell all these stories I've been telling. Go first. Don't wait on anybody else in church to get it. Don't wait for the person behind you. Go first. When you lead a movement, you lead it from the street. You don't lead it from the office. You don't lead it from the balcony. Movements are led by street fighters in the street. Go first. Secondly, though, don't go alone. Look and pray and ask God, because you can do this as Pentecostals. Ask God to show you who is susceptible to the virus. It might be somebody in your congregation. It might not be. It might be a friend of yours that doesn't even darken a church door. Build a coalition of people who get it. I can tell you most of the evangelism that's going to be done in missional church expression is not the confrontational stuff across, I've got something to tell you, that it's going to be shoulder to shoulder, not this way. People we're working with to tutor kids who say, why are you doing this? And then we are ready to give an answer for the hope that is in us. This is how we're going to be salt and light. So take people with you and make heroes out of them. That's kind of the second part of that same suggestion. Tell their stories. Listen, I was in this Episcopal congregation in the South. I was there for the weekend, flailing around about this stuff. The rector got it, and one person got it, as far as I know. She stood up and said, I'm an 8th grade science teacher. I need help. If any of you will just come to school and help me after school. And then, all right, a year later, I'm back there, and I'm meeting with the vestry. I said, how's that school thing going? She said, going great. We've got 9 people every week. Now, you say, that's not many. Let me tell you, they only worship, they worship less than 100 adults. This is, all the early adopters, in effect, are in. And so Susan said, tell them, Fred, about the deal. And Fred shakes his head no. I said, Fred, what? And says, Susan, I'll tell you. He said, Fred took a kid that failed 8th grade. Not only is he past 8th grade now, he's in 9th grade. He's knocking the ball out of the park. And I said, Fred, what are you doing with this kid? I said, come on. He said, well, I talk to him a couple times a week. We have breakfast on Monday. I make sure he's got what he needs. Talking about an African-American kid in the Deep South with a lily white Fred. About as culturally, Anglican, And so I said, Fred, what you're doing with this kid is changing his life. He's shaking his head again now, but big old tears. I said, no, what this kid's doing for me is way more than I'm doing for him. Fred's 76 years old. He's on the vestry. He's an ace church leader. He's been, awarded the Church Medal of Honor to be on the vestry. Or he screwed up in a previous life and he's being punished by being on the vestry. Whichever way you want to look at this. You get Fred up in that congregation telling his story, you've just spread the virus. So don't go alone. Third thing, if I were you, I would read all I could about managing and leading change and transition, because this is a huge leadership issue. You're used to making pronouncements that the Spirit told you something, and you expect everyone to fall in line. I understand. But not everyone does. You have a few carnal Christians that don't just believe everything you say. Some of them are going to have to be led through a transition. And transition is the emotional component to change management. It's how we emotionally process the change. And most of us don't get thrown overboard because of the change. Can I tell you, most of the folks in your pew get the fact that things have to change. They're watching little by little. They know the gig's up. They know we're not winning at the old game. They know this. And they're lamenting, and our typical approach is let's double down on the stuff that's not working. Let's just amp up the stuff. That's all they know to tell you, because we have trained them for 1,700 years to think like this. So be patient with them. But think about, I would read Cotter. I would read the Harvard Business School people. I would read Quinn. I would read William Bridges on translation. I would have workshops and all that kind of stuff among yourselves about how do we keep from being thrown off the boat when we're making this change here. That's important. And finally, there's just got to be a finally. Face your fears. Some of you have some pretty loud anxieties. I can hear them. I can feel them. Because the enemy whose kingdom we're invading is talking to you the whole time I'm talking to you. They're never going to let you do this. You try this, they'll run you out of town so quick. They won't back you up when the going gets tough. You can't count on them. I remember getting this email. Start off with, Dear Brother McNeal. Now, no one who knows me calls me Brother McNeal, so I knew this was someone that didn't know me or a distant cousin or something if they were a brother, and it came to me in my capacity as a leader. Dear Brother, and I was leading a denominational effort to shift the scorecard and stuff like that. Dear Brother McNeal, there are a lot of people upset. You know how these letters go, don't you? You've all gotten them. I tell leaders all the time, that's why you never count your critics, because they always say there are a lot of people upset with it. You have to weigh them. One person can weigh a ton because they may represent a whole tribe of people that you don't know anything about. But most of them just, how much does 1,000 gnats weigh, So you just deal with gnat stuff. You can wrestle a gnat and you're going to win, but it's not worth it. So you got to weigh them. Dear Brother McNeal, and by the way, this email was copied to everybody. Mother Teresa was alive at the time. She got a copy. Billy Graham got a copy. Everybody that, my boss got a copy, of course. And it was 90 minutes before I was leaving the country on vacation. Back in the day when if you were really gone, you were gone. You remember this? And no one expected you to stay in touch and all that. Because you couldn't. Cell phone, you had internet cafes around, but you were gone. And so this email explodes. And you're going to find out, blah, blah, blah. It rants on for a while. So I write the guy back. I said, Dear Brother so-and-so, you're going to hell. Because that's how I usually deal with my critics. This is easy. They're just of Satan. But you may have other choices, but for me it's kind of simple. So, dear Brother, we obviously need to talk. Dear brother, I'm leaving the country. I'll be back in 10 days. I'll be in touch. Email, send, boom. Now I sent the email, but it's not gone because it's right up here. I carry this all the way overseas, all night long flying. About the time I'm about to fall asleep, I think, and I compose another reply to this guy. About 300 replies overseas, I figure. Each one more rapier thrust. He'll be bled to death before he knows he's pricked. I am working this guy over. My bile is going full capacity. I am chewing up. And 3 days into the trip, I'm still working on this email. We're standing in front of the Tower of London, and I'm thinking, now this is how we used to deal with this stuff. Except I'd be the one on the inside because there was mention of heresy. You always have to mention that. Because if you're a heretic, they can do anything to you. It's what religious people do to you before they let you die that's the terrifying stuff. And so I turned to Kathy and I said, I can't get that email off my mind. She said, what email? Kind of hurt my feelings. I said, that email I told you about on the way to the airport. She said, oh, yeah, well, Reggie, what if he's right? She saw me flinch. She said, no, what I mean is that, she said, what if there are a lot of people that don't like what you do? Would you still do it? Do you think you're doing what God wants you to do? What's the worst thing that could happen? We lose our job? You think God would look after it? Now, boy, is this aggravating or what? I've spent 3 days on this email. She's just going down the checklist of do, in a few minutes. And she's also saying, grow up. We got to go on to the Beefeater store. Quit your whining. We got stuff to do here. But you know what she did for me? What a great gift. Because what she did is she reached inside and she grabbed the dragon by the throat and threw it out on the ground and said, look, that puppy's got no teeth. What's the worst thing that could happen? In light of the Tower of London, losing your job ain't that big of a loss. People lost a whole lot more in there and lived to tell it. What she did was she cornered the enemy and said, gotcha. She just threw the spotlight right on it. Because the enemy loves to slither around the corner, you see. About the time you get it go, like Hogwarts, something's around the corner. The enemy whispers fear to us when you're invading his kingdom because it's the most debilitating thing he can do. That's why don't be afraid is the most frequent command in Scripture. God gets this. Brothers and sisters, don't be afraid. Because he is with you. And like a flood,